The death of Karyn Kupcinet. How urban legends start. It was a commonplace homicide, if such things can be commonplace. A young, conflicted, and emotionally unstable young woman at the start of her life was strangled to death by persons unknown. However, through an odd assortment of substandard journalism, hyperbole, and speculation to the absurd, her death has gone down in history as something much more sinister than it was. Karyn Kupcinet, her friends called her Cookie, was a Hollywood actress and the daughter of noted Chicago columnist and television personality Herb Kupcinet. Called Cup around his beloved Chicago, Cup was a gossip columnist who knew everyone in the right places. His friends included former President Truman, Jack Benny, Danny Thomas, Joan Crawford, Bing Crosby, and Bob Hope, all big names in Hollywood in 1960. Kupcinet was a pioneer on television, starting a live on-air celebrity talk show in early 1945, and then joining CBS's late-night talk show Newsline up until 1952, and then in 1957, he replaced Jack Paar on NBC's America After Dark, which eventually became The Tonight Show. Kupcinet's Chicago-based program ran from 1959 to 1986 in syndication and reached 70 stations nationwide and featured international newsmakers. Karyn Kupcinet, who stood 5'1" and had an IQ of at least 140, had a reputation for being difficult, high-strung, self-absorbed, and obsessive, particularly about her weight, which led to abuse of diet pills, a problem that began in high school, and other prescription drugs to which she eventually became addicted. Star-struck from childhood, Karyn had one ambition: to be a movie star. She dropped out of junior college after 1 year to study acting in New York with Lee Strasberg,
ladies and gentlemen, and welcome
moved to
to
Hollywood in
another hour
1960 after Jerry Lewis, a family friend, offered her a role in his movie The
learn
Ladies'
about them.
Man.
First, you're going to meet the Reverend Theodore
Afterwards, with her
Hesburgh, the
father's
president
help,
of the University
she
of
also
Notre Dame,
found bit
advisor
parts
to
in television
presidents,
shows
and also the
Surfside
author
Six,
of a book called The
Y&I,
Hesburgh Papers.
and Perry
And he'll be
Mason.
joined by the Pulitzer
Sadly,
Prize-winning author David
she had
Halberstam.
chosen the wrong
David
career
is,
path.
a new book on the
Although
market
she
called
took
The
a
Powers
beautiful
That Be.
photograph,
And then we're going to be
several
joined by
years
one of the
plastic
great ladies of
surgery
the
on her
motion
chin,
picture industry,
nose,
Ally
ears,
McGraw.
and eyes,
Our latest
all of
picture is
which
called Players,
resulted in the loss of her
which has a
natural
tennis
beauty
background.
and her
We'll all be
expressiveness
back
on camera.
with the lively art of conversation.
Karyn didn't come across well on film, and she wasn't much of an acting talent either, which producers soon learned. Her lack of ability, combined with her known addiction to amphetamines, her growing reputation for being occasionally difficult on the set, and her often bizarre and erratic behavior around male actors, essentially ended her career before it started. Within a year, the offers for work stopped, and her phone stopped ringing. She stayed largely because she had no motivation to leave. Her parents kept her on a generous allowance, which gave her, unlike many young actors trying to break in the business, a comfortable lifestyle. There were other issues, too. Despite her comfortable circumstances, she had been arrested at least once for shoplifting. In December of 1962, Kupcinet made a guest appearance on The Wide Country and met actor Andrew Prine, the star of the series. The two began a rocky relationship that included Prine's refusal to making the relationship exclusive and a July 1963 illegal abortion. Prine's career was on the way up, and he was singularly focused on that, wasn't looking for a serious and committed relationship. But Kupcinet was, and she became obsessed with the actor, clinging to him and demanding his time and attention. When Prine broke off the relationship, Kupcinet began stalking him. By taxicab, she never learned to drive. She reportedly broke into Prine's apartment to wait for him. When he showed up with a date, she hid in the attic. Shortly afterwards, she started sending him threatening letters. The letters consisted of words and letters that she had cut from magazines. The death threats were a mishmash of words. "You will need protection, Ben Casey. Caught message for your beau. You haven't much time for dreams. Forget fame and romance with aging Glenn Ford. Devil must kill you. Your lady needs surgery suddenly. Expect to get bad breaks wherever you go. Your rich beauty has no time. Are you going to Latin America or Florida? Let your beautiful virgin become lonesome and so easy to make. Bet K-Cup tastes as good as it looks. Blow. You are the certain girl to die. You may die without nobody. Winner of loneliness wants death till someone special cares." When Prine confronted her about the messages, she lied and said that she had been receiving them as well. However, the police found her fingerprints on the papers and the Scotch tape. The fingerprint taken from Kupcinet's 1962 arrest for shoplifting. 6 days after the JFK assassination, her body was found at her West Hollywood, California home. She had been strangled to death. Earlier in the day, Kupcinet arrived an hour late by cab to the dinner party at the home of Mark Goddard, a Lost in Space cast member, and his wife Marcia on Coldwater Canyon Drive in Beverly Hills. Goddard's parents were friends to the Kupcinets back in Chicago. It was Mark and Marcia Goddard who drove her to Mexico to have her abortion. Kupcinet toyed with her food and ate little. The Goddards noticed that her lips seemed numb. Her voice was funny. She moved her head at odd angles, and her pupils were constricted. When Mark Goddard asked her what was wrong, she began to cry, putting her arm around him and telling him that a baby had been abandoned on her doorstep earlier that day. Kupcinet had told Andrew Prine by telephone the same story. She left the party at 8:30 p.m. by taxicab and went home. Before she left, she told her host that the next day, Thanksgiving, she and Prine were going to Glenn Ford's house for the day. Later, Prine and Ford said they didn't know a thing about that. She had also told her parents that she would not be returning home to Chicago for the holiday, since she had found work to do on the program Perry Mason, which also wasn't true. When she returned home, Edward Stephen Rubin, a freelance writer, was waiting by her door. Rubin didn't have a car and said that he had walked to Karyn's house from Beverly Hills, where he was living with another friend. Rubin said he wanted to watch TV. Although it's hard to understand by today's standards, although most people had a television set, very few Americans had state-of-the-art television sets in the 1960s, and Karyn did. Her father's money had bought it for her. Around 9 p.m., according to Rubin, she said she was feeling jittery and went for a walk around the block, where she came across the actor Robert Hathaway, a friend, and invited him up to join her and Rubin. Hathaway and Rubin used to room together and lived next door to Andrew Prine in a duplex. Back at her apartment, they watched the Danny Kaye show with Kupcinet, they said, till around 10:30, when she served coffee and cake, and then Karyn fell asleep, sitting next to them on the couch. She awoke and went to her room. Andrew Prine returned home from a date with the Bavarian actress Anna Capri, and at about 12 a.m., he called Karyn, spoke for less than 5 minutes. The two men said that they lowered the TV's volume. 3 days later, it was still playing with a low volume, and made sure the door was locked behind them before they left the apartment at around 11:15 p.m. They said they went to the rain check room on Sunset Strip for drinks. 3 days later, on November 30th, the Goddards went to Kupcinet's apartment at 1227 Sweetser in West Hollywood to check on her, and found her nude body lying on the couch, on its side, with flecks of blood on her face and a pillow. The apartment door was unlocked. There was an overturned lamp on the floor. A coffee pot and a brandy snifter full of cigarette butts were overturned on the floor. A cup of coffee, partially consumed, was on a stand across the room. She had been dead for 3 days. Mark Goddard initially assumed that she had died from a drug overdose. Police found prescriptions for Desoxyn, Miltown, Amvicel, and other medications in the apartment. No rape test was done due to the technology of the day, and since she had been dead for several days, decomposition was advanced enough so that an autopsy would prove inconclusive. There were no signs of robbery, but a prescription bottle for 100 Desoxyn, a methamphetamine, filled 2 days earlier, was found empty in the bathroom. There was also a note, not a suicide note, written by Kupcinet that went over her emotional problems and issues with her parents, her career, and her love life. The note rambled over a dozen different subjects. I'm no good. I'm not really that pretty. My figure's fat. Will never be the way my mother wants it. Why must I be so alone? What's the use of living if nothing to believe in? There's nothing. Only phony motives, selfish egoists, selfish people, fatheads and drunks, and I want out. I like President Kennedy, Bertrand Russell, Theodore Reichs, Peter O'Toole, Sidney J. Harris, Albert Finney. For me, I feel self-conscious about this, like I'm going to have to get approval on it eventually. Approval it is, or you're doomed to insignificance. Everything I've done, supposedly being myself and with the promise of anonymity, I do for approval, knowing this'll get them. They'll love me for this, and they'll say nice things behind my back. I guess I've been searching for an identity too desperately. Seize the nearest image, whether David, a platonic friend of hers who was a script reader and the brother of movie star Hope Lang, and doing things his way, and pointedly not compromising with my traditional way, and using it versus my parents, snubbing my nose at their way. I always hate to be with them after a lengthy visit with the current boyfriend and their families. Guilt, I guess. Trying to show them I can be something, but always faking it. Never tapping my own resources. Afraid of what? Or that there won't be anything. I mean, my figure's fat, and it will never be the way my mother wants it. I won't let it be the way she wants. How stupid. I want to be slim, and she loves me and wants me to be slim. Intellectualization doesn't mark. Why must I be so alone? Have I fallen that short of my ideal? What does my image of me? Why does it have to be so aesthetic and perfect? And what's the use of living with nothing to believe in, have faith in? Where's the security, or habit, or order? Oh, shit. What good is that going to do? What happens to me, or my Andy? Why doesn't he want me? Why? There's no God. Nothing. Only phony motives, selfish egoists, selfish people, fatheads and drunks. And I want The coroner
out.
ruled her death a homicide due to a broken hyoid bone in her throat. Her thyroid gland, tongue, and larynx were crushed in a fit of rage that left her neck bruised and badly discolored. He also estimated the time of her death around 12:30 a.m., the same time that her call with Andy Prine ended, and that because she was nude and the door was unlocked, police suspected that she knew her killer, and that the killer was left-handed. None of the later suspects in the case were left-handed. Police named Andrew Prine as one of the chief suspects, along with Edward Rubin and Robert Hathaway, and said that the motive was that Prine snapped after he had learned that the anonymous threat letters both he and Kupcinet had received were actually sent by Karyn. Famed L.A. crime writer James Ellroy looked into the case for years and based his conclusions on the extensive police record on Karyn's death. Ellroy concluded Karyn was probably dancing nude when she slipped and fell, hit her throat on the back of a chair, and landed on the sofa. There were 2 sets of prints not belonging to any of the suspects, but strangely none of the prints belonging to Hathaway. All of the suspects all took polygraphs, and all came back as inconclusive. Prine would be questioned by the police once a week for several months after the murder, and according to Ellroy, Prine, Rubin, and Hathaway had been questioned by the sheriff's department many times throughout the 1960s until as late as 1969. However, in 1988, Kupcinet's father published a memoir in which he said he believed that Prine had nothing to do with Karyn's murder, and instead he believed the real murderer was a neighbor in her apartment complex in West Hollywood, California. There were 18 apartments in the upper-income 2-story Spanish-style building. "We pretty much know who did it," Irv Kupcinet said, "but unfortunately the police couldn't come up with the physical evidence to charge him." The person he suspected was actor David Lang, 29, the brother of actress Hope Lang. He was a noted heavy drinker and womanizer who lived in the apartment below Karyn Kupcinet. When questioned by the police, David Lang said that he was out on a date with his girlfriend, actress Natalie Wood, who confirmed his story. Lang said he returned home around 12:30, very drunk, and fell asleep. Irv Kupcinet believed that Lang's wealthy family had hired lawyers who blocked sheriff's investigators from questioning him about the killing. "We hired private detectives," Karyn's mother Essie said. "We even tried mystics. When you're desperate and your own daughter is involved, you'll do anything. We were good friends. She called me sis. I can't believe it happened so long ago. God, how I miss her." Lang went on to produce the hit films Clute and The Sterile Cuckoo. Lang died at his home in Sharon, Connecticut in 2006. Irv Kupcinet never got over his daughter's death. In 1966, when the Chicago Tribune asked Kupcinet to replace the recently deceased head of Hopper, an offer that included moving into Hopper's Hollywood home, which the newspaper owned, he refused, saying he would never move to Hollywood that had sucked our daughter into the maelstrom. Irv Kupcinet died in November 2003 at age 91. His wife Essie died at age 85 in June 2001. Apparently, police also questioned actor Vince Edwards, who was then starring in a hit program called Ben Casey. Reportedly, Prine's wife, Sharon Farrell, had started an affair with Vince Edwards, which led to divorce actions. Prine was asking for $250 in alimony from his wife, who was defended in court by Vince Edwards' lawyer. Farrell had cross-sued Prine for alimony as well. The story is that Karyn Kupcinet made her way onto the set of Ben Casey and tricked Edwards into making a subpoena, an appearance in court. Edwards, a major international star at the time, wasn't a man to toy with. He had his own friends in Hollywood. Born Vincent Edward Zuano Edwards, was raised in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Brooklyn, New York. After deciding to become an actor rather than a con man or a wise guy, as he liked to say, he was often compared to Marlon Brando and James Dean. In early 1961, Edwards went to audition for the part of an airline pilot, but walked into the wrong studio. and accidentally auditioned for the part of Dr. Ben Casey. He got the role. The show ran for 5 years and rated in the top 10 during the 1962 and 63 season. Edwards was a degenerate gambler with a preference for racetracks and card games. He became a regular at Hollywood Park Racetrack, and when he had no money, he borrowed from mob-connected off-track bookies. Even that went back to his childhood. Edwards told the story that at age 14, he had pawned his twin brother Bob's clothes for spending money and advised his sibling never to borrow $10 from one person. Borrow 50 cents from 20 people, and you'll never have to pay them back. Unfortunately, one of the people Edwards borrowed money from was a Shylock named Marty Allen. When Edwards stiffed Allen on a loan, Allen called in Anthony the Animal Fiato, who collected. Fiato didn't get the money, but he beat Edwards senseless. Police would later hold the subpoena over Prine's head, claiming he had some sort of Svengali hold on Kupcinet, without understanding how insanely obsessed she was over Prine. Karyn Kupcinet was buried back home in Chicago, wearing a white gown. Some 1,500 people attended Karyn Kupcinet's funeral, including the state governor and the mayor of Chicago. The death faded into obscurity until 1967, when a man named Penn Jones, Jr. published a book in which he noted an AP wire service story about an unidentified woman in the area code of Oxnard, California, approximately 50 miles north of Los Angeles, who, on November 22, 1963, dialed a telephone operator 20 minutes before President John F. Kennedy was shot to death in Dallas, telling the operator that Kennedy was going to be shot. The following report ran in the Washington Post. Mystery call foretold fate of president. Los Angeles, November 22nd. What could be an intriguing mystery in the president's assassination might center in the Oxnard-Camarillo area near Los Angeles. 15 minutes before Mr. Kennedy was shot, an Oxnard telephone supervisor overheard a woman caller whisper to someone, quote, "The president is going to be killed." The strange call was intercepted by supervisors of the General Telephone Company in Oxnard at 1:10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The fatal wounding of Mr. Kennedy in Dallas occurred shortly after 1:25 Eastern Standard Time. Telephone company executives say it was impossible to trace the mysterious call, other than to know that it originated nearby Oxford-Camarillo area. The state mental institution is located at Camarillo. Ray Sheehan, general manager of the telephone company there, said, "One of our supervisors picked up the call. The caller kept dialing, although her call was still connected. Then she started whispering. Another supervisor listened in, was able to hear the woman saying, 'The president is going to be killed.'" Sheehan said the mysterious call was reported to the police, but after the president had been shot. The FBI investigated the phone call during its probe of the JFK assassination and concluded that the call lasted 10 to 15 minutes. The caller had the voice of a middle-aged woman. The call came in at 10:07 or 10:08 a.m. The president is going to die at 10:10, which was 12:10 Central Standard Time. But it was said very fast by the caller, and it might have been, "The Justice, the Supreme Court. There's going to be a fire in all the windows. The government is going up in flames." And then named 12 courts in order of importance, starting with the Supreme Court to Probate Court and Juvenile Court. The caller then repeated, "The president is going to die at 10:30, and mentioned the courts again, and said, "The government takes over everything, lock, stock, and barrel," and then mumbled, "Thermostat, rheostat, haostat." According to the book Legacy of Doubt, Robert Kennedy was interested in the call and investigated it as well. Supposedly Oxnard Detective Sergeant Ed gave Kennedy documents, phone records, while he was in Oxnard, California during a campaign stop. The records revealed that the call had been made from Federal Commissioner Ben Nordman's and Ventura Superior Court Judge Jerome Berenson's law office over 20 minutes before JFK was assassinated, and that, quote, he was going to be killed. RFK was also given the names of the persons making the phone call. The author of the story provided no sources or corroboration for this tale. Jones alleged that the caller was Kupcinet because she lived in the Oxnard area, the reason that the call was why Kupcinet was murdered. What Jones left out, the fact was, on November 22, 1963, Kupcinet was in Palm Springs with 6 friends, including Andrew Prine. He also admitted the fact that Karyn Kupcinet was murdered almost a week after the JFK assassination, 2 days after the JFK killing as he had originally written. The insane and groundless rumor made its way to NBC's Today Show, which presented a list of people who died violently in 1963, shortly after the death of President John F. Kennedy, and may have had some link to the assassination. The first name on the list was Karyn Kupcinet. After that, hundreds of books used Karyn Kupcinet's tragic death as proof that there was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, and an urban legend was born. Kupcinet's murder remains officially unsolved.